afternoon with that action planning. So I know Missy just went through steps 1 through 6, and there's still a lot of things that need to be done on those steps. So we're going to get to that this afternoon. And Missy mentioned a few times a tool that we have for you as far as looking at accomplishing those steps. I want to highlight that yes, we made it in check boxes, so it makes it easier to say like we've accomplished something. But sometimes I get a little bit nervous about check boxes because just because you check it doesn't mean it's done forever. That you might have to go back and tweak. So as you roll out lesson plans next year, you might say, yes, we created them all, great, done. Ooh, but once you notice in rollout, that didn't quite go as planned, or we didn't think of how are we going to ensure fidelity across the teachers. So you might need to go back and tweak. So I like the check boxes to get us moving through ensuring that things are ready for rollout. But then you might have to go erase some check boxes and make sure that you're tweaking and constantly evaluating what you're doing. So, moving forward, we're working on step 7 here, looking at this continuum for discouraging violations of expectations. This is again your consequence system that we're going to set up. So we're going to go through this clearly. I'm going to put a few questions out on the table, and we're going to look at a code of conduct. So if you have a district code of conduct, we will pull that up. Don't worry about that right this minute. We'll get to that piece. No worries. So the continuum of consequences, why is this important? Why do you think it's important to have a continuum of consequences? That there's just not one consequence for every behavior.
Is this consequences for the children or for the teachers for following this plan?
Oh, she's setting up 2 sets of consequences
really,
here.
yeah.
One holding staff accountable. So that's going to be somewhat of your fidelity tool to ensure that staff are buying in and are using it. So I'm going to say step 9, I believe, is encouraging staff. Okay. So we're going to try to use the positive language for them to get buy-in. Here we're going to be talking about consequences for student behavior. But again, that continuum, then not every behavior. So take for example, a student is tardy to class. If we say for every behavior violation, we give students in-school suspension. So they're late to class, they get an in-school suspension. They're not in dress code, they get an in-school suspension. Does that make sense?
No.
No. We need to think about the context of what's happening, the student. Is it the first time that they haven't worn their school uniform? Is it the 20th time they haven't worn their school uniform? So thinking about those variety of student needs in the context of where we're at. So you're not setting the same violation for every rule that's being violated. And again, this hierarchy, that there's a continuum. We want teachers to feel supported in their classroom to have a consequence system that's clear, but we also need a school-wide system. And I think of your ODR form, it should be aligned with some of those consequences that you have set up on your ODR. So in a few minutes, when we look at your code of conduct, I'm going to have you pull up your ODR as well, comparing what do we have in that bottom checkbox of action taken, and what is written as your code of conduct to ensure that there's alignment. Because we don't want to be holding kids accountable one way, but actually in documentation we're saying something else. So ensuring that there's that alignment. So let's look at the critical features. Hello, thanks for joining us. We're just getting, no worries, I'm glad you're here. We're just moving into this continuum of consequence strategies. So looking at step 7.
Nope, okay.
Hour lunch if you were here on time.
You still get a lunch. Who can tell me the first bullet there relating to the function of the behavior? What is function of behavior? I know there's some folks in this room that can probably cue this off. What? The cause of behavior. So why students engage. Does anybody know what like the 2 major functions are? Avoid, or escape, or to obtain, or get something. So those are the 2 kind of major functions. Either next time here in March.
I'm really glad I brought chocolate today because you guys have all the right answers.
Yes. So I think it might be our second time that we're here in March. We're going to look over exactly, we're going to get deep into function of behavior and classroom behavior management strategies, because we want teachers to feel equipped to be handling a lot of this in the classroom. Remember your flow chart, what is classroom managed, what is office managed. We want them to understand function of behavior, and we want them to understand consequences that go along with those, appropriate consequences. So we're gonna chat about that. The second bullet, the importance there of this alignment with our school-wide expectations. So what's happening in the classroom should be aligned with what we set up school-wide. I will say, in my experience here training at CERC and doing the TFIs to various schools, this is where we see the biggest kind of murky waters, where teachers will set up what their rules or expectations are in their classroom, and that they don't align with what's happening school-wide. So that's why the matrix is really important, having staff buy in with all of that, but also giving them the liberty to define what show respect, try our best, and staying safe is in their classroom. But again, those 3 major expectations are going to hold true no matter where you are in your building. And again, just like we have clarity around teaching expectations and what those are, we also need clarity around consequences. So students should be aware of what consequences are, staff should be aware, parents should be aware. It should really be a transparent process. I did a training on Friday around restorative practices, and they have this slide around fair process. So that means students, if we can, which I think is best practice, are engaged in this conversation of defining the expectation in their classroom, but also defining what happens when you don't follow the expectations. So they have their voice to help kind of set up that continuum of consequences, but then they're really clear on what happens when we don't follow a rule, so we can hold them accountable for that behavior. So I encourage student voice in that, and I encourage kind of transparency in that process, so that it's not a secret of what's going to happen to you if you aren't following one of our expectations. What do you think are some of your teacher strategies for discouraging inappropriate behavior? What do you think is happening in classrooms currently?
A structured reward system. The kids know the expectations.
So that's currently happening in some classrooms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm talking first, yeah.
Yeah, nice. So you have a structured reward policy. So students are already getting knowledge for positive behavior, so that's already going to be discouraging those negative behaviors. Nice. So next year when we're rolling out and implementing, it won't be such a big shift. So make sure that there's a tie to what's happening across the building. Any other things that you've seen in classrooms as far as how folks are discouraging inappropriate behaviors?
You just want the positive.
Well, you know what? Let's hear what's not working, because that'll be important for us to think about when we're action planning. It might be some areas for staff training.
Recess, losing recess.
So losing recess.
Writing, I won't do something.
100
So like
times.
this.
Taking it personally.
Taking.
The behavior.
Why don't those work? So let's use those 3 examples.
So you're
there.
saying the staff is taking it personally?
Yep. So currently, in some classroom practices, is students having to write, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this. I think of The Simpsons.
Yes.
Isn't that how we started out, like art on the board?
Yes.
Some of them are taking away recess or taking behavior very personally. Why doesn't that work?
It doesn't reinforce the positive and it doesn't eliminate the negative.
So it's not relating there to function.
Right.
We're actually not teaching what we want them to do.
Right.
So instead we're just taking away,
Setting them up for failure.
but we're not getting back to that teaching that skill piece. So that's important to know though, as we look at classroom practices. If we have folks that that's kind of the tools in their tool belt right now, how do we give them some other tools? So that's important for our discussion.
Yeah, and some classrooms have a great ticket. I think you have that too.
We do Class Dojo, so it's
And some do the class dojo or some do the tickets.
Yeah.
They
So
earn
they can
tickets.
lose, but they can also earn it back.
Yeah.
So like it's trying to get them back to the positive. So it's not, so they could lose recess, but they could also earn time back.
Yep.
Like it's not just completely gone.
So I'm gonna maybe make 2 notes for your action plan then. If I would like to know how much is dojo being used, because if that is a system that's being
5
used,
teachers in the school.
5 teachers. But if we say we're going to move to a different system, how will those 5 teachers feel? So making sure that we have some idea of how much that's being used. And then I'm just going to do a quick little teach on dojo, or the removing of privileges, that it's not, if we're acknowledging a student with dojo points, but then we can take them away very easily, that dojo point no longer becomes that valuable because I can lose it just as quickly as I get it. So what we've done in some schools is we only give dojo points, we don't take them away. It's kind of similar to, we've talked a lot about here, your red, yellow, green clip chart. How are we going to revise that to ensure that it's really positively reinforcing? Because I will say I worked with a group of kindergartners that typically the kids who are losing points or are on the bottom of your clip chart are kind of always there and not feeling successful. Or interestingly enough, last week I had a group of teachers from an alternative setting that they said their students never wanted to make it all the way to the highest level because they knew they couldn't stay there because they were so used to getting their clip moved that they never actually wanted to get to the highest level because they just knew that it would quickly be moved. So just thinking about personal student feelings on the system. So, but we'll get more into that when we talk about what is your acknowledgement system and then what is this flow of consequences. So, gosh, this must have been 2 months ago. We worked on these school teams and district level teams that you have. So I want to think about district-wide, so Ansonia, not just Meade School. I assume that there is some type of code of conduct on policies of behavior. Typically, I will say, when we go into districts, the code of conduct is really the heavy hitter kind of consequences. So if there's harassment happening, bullying happening, weapons on school, Typically, there's really clear guidelines written on what happens if this happens. It's a very kind of black and white policy. I'm going to have you pull that out in a little bit. If you do have one, it's probably online somewhere. What I want to highlight is code of conduct doesn't always jive with what we're doing with PBIS. So if you see here the last 2 bullets there, that it was really focusing on those punitive responses and student removal. We're trying not to do that. We're trying to get teachers more equipped with how to manage behavior in classrooms. We're also getting students to be more bought in and taught the skills on our expectations so they're actually more successful in classrooms. And we're going to look more at restorative practices around how we react to behavior rather than those removals, suspensions, expulsions. That's not what we're trying to do. So this could be a piece that we need to bring back to some of those district level teams of how can we maybe revise some of our code of conduct, or what does that mean here at Meade School? What does our handbook say? I understand that there are need for some black and white policies, especially around some of those big heavy hitters, but ensuring that there's some individuality. So if it's a student, it's a first offense, how do you handle that versus a student who's habitually struggling with this? And then if there is a student who's habitually struggling with this violation, how are we ensuring that they're getting taught the skill and know what to expect? So it's kind of a continuous loop. So we're looking for more positives, but we're going to take a moment right now actually to look at your code of conduct. So as a team, is it online or is it an actual like booklet that you have?
I have it online. I don't have it printed
Perfect.
out.
That's fine. We can hook you up to the projector and we can do this for a moment. So you're going to
Well,
review
that's the school one.
your
Or
code
this
of
is
conduct.
the
District
What
one.
does your
Okay.
district have in place? You're going to see how behavior is currently handled. Does that align with what you have on your ODR form? Is there a match between what your options are there and what your code of conduct says? If not, that doesn't mean that that's something bad. It might mean there might need to be a revision on one of those. And then ensuring, is there behavior definitions that are part of your code of conduct? Are there policies tied to your ODR system or data collection? So looking at those pieces, because we're going to move forward today, looking at this continuum of consequences and how to use this data to inform practices. So it's really important to say what's written now. So let's take 10 minutes to do this. I said 15, but since we started a little late, let's take 10 to look at your code of conduct.
Want me to hook it up there?
Yep.